Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the second video in the CSS section, and in this video we're going to learn how we actually go about including CSS in our projects. If you saw the previous video, we know what CSS is and how its syntax looks, so the next step is putting HTML and CSS together and having these two technologies working in tandem. There are basically three ways we can get our CSS and HTML working together. We can include our CSS inline with our HTML inside the opening tags of elements. Secondly, we can add CSS internally inside the HTML file enclosed by style tags. And third, we can have our CSS external to our HTML in a totally separate file, and we would call this a style sheet, and we can link that style sheet to our HTML file using a link tag. We'll discuss the pros and cons of each of these three approaches in this video, so by the end you will know how to have your HTML and CSS working together, and you will know three ways in which you can do this. I'll start by talking about inline CSS. I'm in VS Code here, and I have a dummy web page that has some fairly simple HTML that's making use of a few different elements that I'm sure we're all fairly familiar with. If you want to use this same file, the link to download it from GitHub is below in the description, and you just click this green button to download it, and then once it's downloaded you can unzip it and open it in VS Code. I'm using the live server extension, which you can add to VS Code via the extensions tab here on the left. Using this means that any changes that we make and save will be updated on the page automatically, meaning that we do not have to manually refresh the browser to see changes. In the main, using inline CSS goes against the best practices of using CSS with HTML, so why mention it at all? Well, it's just so that you know that it exists. You may come across it out in the wild, and you will see inline styles occasionally when using JavaScript libraries like React, for example, where you have these self-contained and reusable components, and the idea of separating out your concerns is slightly different. The concerns in React would be the self-containment of the component itself, and everything to do with that component would be in that component's individual file. All of the JavaScript, all of the HTML for the component rendered using JSX, and all of the styles would be inline or elsewhere in the file provided by a third party like styled components or semantic UI. But we will talk more about these ideas and concepts when we look at React. For now, we will concentrate on plain old CSS and get that working with HTML. Inline styles were once the only way that we could style elements before separate style sheets were an option. And inline styles basically consist of using style declarations in the opening tags of HTML elements inside a style attribute. So we would use a style attribute inside the opening tag of whichever HTML elements we want to style. The style attribute's property would then be the style and the value that we wanted to include. One of the problems that I will tell you about is that if you wanted to target multiple elements with the same styles, let's say we had 10 li elements, for example, and we wanted to make them green, you would have to add the style attribute 10 times to each opening tag, and then also add the style of color green. So let's try this out. We have at a rough count 6 H2 elements on the page, and I'll go to the first of these, and in the opening tag I will add style equals color spring green. To review, we have a style attribute here, and inside the style attribute's double quotes is a CSS property and its value. In our case, the property here is color and the value is spring green. Note that the property and value are separated by a colon. When we save, we see that the H2 we selected is now a spring green color. And as we said before, if we wanted to employ this method to make all of the H2s the same color, we'd need to add this same style attribute again to every other H2 element. If we had 100 or more of these, that's quite a lot of pointless work. And what if down the road we wanted to have a different shade of green or change them all back to black? You see the problems that we have from a maintenance perspective. Again, it's a lot of unnecessary labor, and there are thankfully better ways to do it. So Let's make some maintenance or style changes that we want to come later on. If we wanted to make our text big as well as green, we'd add a semicolon to let the browser know that we wanted to end the previous style declaration. And then we would say font size is 50 pixels. If we wanted to add that to all of our H2 elements, then we would need to repeat that again and again in each element's opening tag. What we will do actually to further show the limitations of inline CSS is to go down to our unordered list here. If I wanted just the first two list items to also be green, you see my dilemma. I'd have to copy these styles from the H2 and add them into the opening li tag of each element again. Say I wanted to change the font size to smaller than we had before, say 40 pixels. I'd now have to do this twice, as you can see, and twice more if I changed my mind. Imagine I had a list of 20 items that I wanted to apply these styles to, or even more than that. Say we had a page where we were listing products for sale in our online store, and we wanted to make each product's descriptive text a little bigger and more readable. It's a lot of work that's unnecessarily time consuming, and it makes for too much messy code. So this is a bad idea. It's a much better idea to find another way of doing this. So we will look at two other ways in which we can add styles, which are much more manageable. These are internal and external CSS. External CSS is what I would recommend 99% of the time, and the kind that we will be using going forward throughout these CSS videos. But we'll get to external CSS in just a few minutes once we've looked first at internal CSS. So internal CSS are CSS styles which are included internally within an HTML file by adding style tags in the head section of the HTML file. We give these style tags a type attribute sometimes to define that the styles are going to be CSS, though these aren't strictly necessary, and often you will find this type attribute excluded and it doesn't really make any difference. In between these style tags, we can add any style properties that we like and apply these to any elements using CSS selectors. We'll discuss selectors in depth in an upcoming video, but to select the body element and give it a background color of cadet blue, I use body, then some curly braces and our style declaration of background color, cadet blue. I'll also target the paragraph elements on our page and give them a color of khaki. And we'll also give that a font weight of 300. So I hope you already see the benefits of this approach over inline styling. We have multiple P elements or paragraph elements on our page, and with one selector we were able to style all of them simultaneously, as opposed to having to go down here to each P element's opening tag and add the styles in there again and again. If we changed our mind and also wanted our P elements to be spring green in colour, we'd change that in one place. But why isn't this way of including styles internally, using style tags in the head of the HTML, not an ideal situation either? Well, first, we're not separating out our concerns. We're not keeping our styles and content separate from one another in different files. Where possible, when dealing with just HTML, CSS and JavaScript, we want to keep our files contained to doing the one job that they do best. Our content in the HTML file, our style in the CSS file, and our functionality and interactivity in the JavaScript file. This idea changes with the use of front-end libraries like React, as we said before, but we will discuss that when we get to it. Also, internal styles are not optimal if we're working with a multi-page website that has more than one HTML file. Perhaps our website has a contact page, a product page, an FAQ page, and so on, each of which are an individual HTML file. If we are using internal styles to style our web pages, we would need to reapply common styles that the pages share, like the font family or the background color or the text color, etc., again and again and again, in the head section of each file for uniformity, which is unnecessary and also repetitive. Whatever we put in the head of the document inside the style tags would be exclusive to each given particular file. So navigating to a new page would mean loading new styles for it. So again, not ideal. It's okay for us to do if we're, say, in a sandbox environment and we're learning or testing things out on the fly and we just want to throw up a few styles quickly, but otherwise it's best practice to find a better way. And lucky for us, there is a better way. We can include an external style sheet and link it to whichever HTML file that we want to style. Before we look at that, let's summarize quickly what we've seen so far. Inline styling uses a style attribute inside the opening tag of an HTML element, and we place our CSS properties and their values inside the style attribute's double quotes. We found that with inline styles, we'd have to go to each individual element that we wanted to style and add in the styles. If there were common elements throughout the page that shared styles, let's say paragraph elements that were displaying text in a given color, then we would have to go to each of them one by one and add the styles to them. Internal CSS creates a style element in the head of the HTML file, and we include our selectors within the style elements opening and closing tags. We said this might not be an optimal approach if we were working with a multi-page website, as we would need to reapply the styles again and again on each page, which is inefficient. We're also not separating out our concerns of content and style. So the best practice for us is to use external CSS, and this is what you're going to use 99% of the time in your projects. External CSS refers to a separate external CSS file that we will link to our HTML file using a link tag. In the external CSS file, or style sheet as we would call it, we declare all of the styles that we want to use. This means you only need to set the styles once. If you want to update the style of your website on as many pages as you like, you only need to do it in one file. External styles also mean that our content and our styles are kept entirely separate. The link element is an empty element, meaning that it doesn't need a closing tag, and it goes inside the head section of our HTML. And we would give it three attributes. Type, which specifies the type of document being linked to. This is easy in CSS as it is always text/CSS. Then we have a rel attribute, which specifies the relationship between the HTML page and the file being linked to. The relationship is style sheet when linking to CSS. Then we have the href, which specifies the path to the file. Often you'll see the type attribute omitted as it isn't strictly necessary, and in fact if you use an emit shortcut to create a link tag, which is what many people would do for the sake of brevity, then it doesn't actually include that type attribute. I'll delete the link tag that we currently have and save, and you see that all of our styles disappear except for the inline and internal styles. I'll get rid of each of these for now. And once I have done that, I will save, and we have our plain and unstyled HTML. Now I'll use that emit shortcut to create a link tag, and the shortcut is link:_CSS. Remember to do this in the head section. If we hit enter, emit generates that for us, and we see our link tag without the type attribute included. We hit save and it works just fine, which means that all the styles that we are currently seeing on our page are now coming from this one linked style sheet called style.css, which just contains some very simple styles that I have pre-written. If we take a look at that quickly, we see that we have several selectors. We have this selector, which is targeting the body and setting a Helvetica font and 0 margin. And then we have several class selectors targeting classes on elements like this one here. Dotbox is targeting any elements with the class of box applied to them and giving them these styles. If we check the HTML file for that class, we see that that is applied to all of these list items, which each manifest on the page as a box, surprisingly enough. We know that these are classes, as in CSS syntax. We have a period or full stop preceding the name of the selector, and as I said earlier, we'll go over selectors in great detail in upcoming videos. An HTML page can link to more than one style sheet. It could have several link elements in the head section for every CSS file being used. For example, some developers may use one style sheet to control the layout and another to control the presentation, such as fonts and colors. We can also link to external resources that we might use in our projects. Common examples of this could be Bootstrap or a Google Fonts, for example, both of which we would link to our HTML using a link tag that they provide us. So let's add another link and we'll do a Google font. I'll comment out the fonts family currently applied to the body element and save, and we go back to this standard serif font. Now I'll head over to fonts.google.com and select a font that I want to use on my web page. Let's choose Montserrat by clicking this plus symbol, and it gives us two things: a link which goes in our head and some CSS to apply the font. We can also customize by adding different font weights, but we'll keep it as is for now. So I'll copy the link, head over to my HTML file and paste that into our head section. We now have two external links, one to our CSS file and one to Google Fonts. We'll head back to Google Fonts and grab the CSS that it gives us, and we'll go back to the CSS file, and in the body selector I will paste that in. Now when we save, we see that we now have our text displayed in the Montserrat typeface, which is pretty cool, and that's all brought to us by an external resource, Google Fonts, and we are linking to that using the link tag in the head section of our HTML file. Okay, that's an overview of how we can add CSS to our HTML using three different approaches. We can include styles in line with elements, internally in the HTML file's head section, and externally to the HTML file using a link tag to connect a style sheet or another external resource from a third party. Going forward, you'll see me using external CSS and linking separate style sheets for the rest of the videos on CSS, and I encourage you to do the same. So get in some practice linking documents if possible and get familiar with the link tag. So thanks for watching. I really do appreciate your time. If you like the content on the channel, then remember to like and subscribe and check in with us on social media. We're on all of the main platforms and the links to everything is below in the description. Other than that, I will see you in the comment section below and in the next video, which is on something called default browser styles and CSS resets. So thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.